Great. Thank you very much, Katie. And good afternoon or good morning to some of you on the West Coast. This is Kyle Thomas, and as Katie mentioned, I'm joined today by Lindsay Schmidt. And what we hope to feature today is a virtual discussion of our new software initiative that is now live and out in the examination world, the state examination system. As Katie mentioned, we want this to be discussional, but I think we're going to save our questions for the end. We've got a couple of polls for you along the way, and our goals here today are really to orient you with the system, basically give you an understanding of what the system does, what it doesn't do, and then highlight in the system, we got a couple places where we're actually going to jump into the live system, and we're going to show you a couple of the things it can do to speed up and improve your examination process, so to speak, in action. So with that, let's jump right into our agenda. First thing is just to get us started and getting you familiar with the polling technology. We're going to start a poll, or we're going to start off with a poll. I just want to gauge your familiarity with the system, what we call SES, the state examination system. So if you could please use the poll window in the Zoom meeting to respond with your vote. We'll tally them up as we go. All right, we'll give it another second or two for any stragglers to get in. We've got about 70% in so far. So this one's not a tough vote, so cast your ballot.
Where?
Okay. So it looks like we're at about 75, 80% in. The results are that most of you have had some exposure to SES through maybe a conference you've attended by CSBS or one of the other trade associations, or maybe you participated in acceptance testing. About the same amount of people have only heard about it and are not very familiar with it. So it looks like we got about an even split between folks who've had some exposure and folks who have very little exposure, not familiar with it. And we've got a couple outliers who were actually part of the pilot and have actually used the system. So maybe I should just turn this presentation over to them and have them do this presentation. But it looks like today's audience is right where we want it to be, which is kind of giving folks a high enough level overview where you can understand what it will do, what it won't do. And we want to build that engagement and awareness in your agency as you start to consider adopting the system. So I'm going to close that poll, and we got another one coming, so be prepared with that. Here's our agenda for the day. I want to orient you and explain how SES fits into the organization's broader goals towards network supervision and why we think that SES and network supervision are important and how they work towards that same mission. And then to show you some of this in action, I want to take a deeper dive into the common standards that we're creating in the system and how those contribute to network supervision. Moving forward, then to show you the scheduling aspects of SES and how scheduling works in this new system. And then finally, we're going to close with some slides about the consumer complaints functionality in the system, because I think convention out there is that SES is an exam system, and that's probably partly because of the acronym. SES stands for State Examination System, so most people think it's only about exams, but it does so much more than that. It does investigations. It will do enforcement actions in the future, and it will very soon do complaints for all agencies out there who process complaints from the consumers. So we want to make sure we call that out specifically on today's call. So like I said, we got a mix of slides today and a brief demo. Let's jump in. The first thing I always say when we start talking to a new group of people, and if you've heard this before, my apologies, but I think it bears repeating. SES is the beginning of business not as usual. This is important. This is important to understand because SES represents a change to the way your examination and consumer complaints processing happens. The biggest part of the change is that it's going to become more collaborative and more networked. So we got some bullets there I want to step through. Some of the goals of SES are to support support and encourage multi-state examinations such that exams of multi-state companies will not happen in isolation. That's just another way of saying less single state exams, and where we were doing single state, we should be doing multi-state exams. So one exam of a company with all states involved instead of 20 exams of that company on an individual basis. That's more efficient. And it's now possible because SES is that single platform that all states are using or will be using soon. You'll coordinate on exams and through that coordination, like I said, reducing the number of single state exams. We're going to show you how that works in the scheduling process and how we'll present information as your agency is going through the scheduling process to be better able to coordinate with other agencies on companies that you are going to be supervising yourself. There's also a big potential in SES to change the way we look at companies according to their risk profile. So we already have a wealth of data on companies through the call reports and through our analytics platforms. Connecting them into SES and being able to inform our supervision plans through SES is a big change. I know many of your agencies today consider yourselves risk focused, and that's great. But there's room to move that needle more, I think, and as we're seeing in SES, it allows us to have a platform to do that, especially once we get the data integrated into our system. Like I mentioned, the biggest change is that you're collaborating with your fellow regulators much more in this system, and the information you have about your companies can be shared simply and securely with your peers if it's appropriate. Sharing in SES is not automatic. It requires a regulator's judgment and a regulator's decision, but it does allow you very simply, if it's appropriate, to share exams, exam information, and even your schedule. And then the last but not least is this notion of using common standards and developing best practices around those standards. This is important from a company's experience, but also I think it offers an opportunity for regulators. On the company side, they're bombarded with lots of exams, and the components of those exams are not familiar to them, meaning one state's information request looks very different than another state's information request. And that becomes a problem for them because they're not able to build familiarity with that when they're seeing different things asked for in different ways. Using common standards gets us to a point where we can really drive some of these efficiencies through the system. And we've built tools in SES for you to use that improve your ability to build these standards and groom these standards into kind of the state that we would need them to be in for nationwide use. So we'll talk through that as we go as well. Another poll. So this one helps us understand a little bit more about how you work today with respect to collaborating with other agencies. So if we have a second, respond to the poll of how frequently you collaborate with other agencies on an exam today. Often, sometimes, never, or I'm not sure, I'm new to the exam process. And as you're filling this out, we recognize that the collaboration mindset exists differently in different industries. I come from the bank examination side. I think many of you know my background. I was an examiner with the state of Iowa, and we didn't often work with other state agencies because in the bank exam process, it's the chartering agency, the chartering state that typically does the lion's share of the work. There are a few banks where we collaborated with other state agencies, but not that many. We often collaborated with federal agencies. As I've gotten more familiar with the mortgage side and the money transmission side, this kind of collaboration with other state agencies is becoming more common. And so we're seeing that more, and I'm just excited to see what SES can do to support that. So we got about half the voters in. I think we'll tally up the results. It looks like there's a pretty even split between those that sometimes and often do. Yeah, we're about 80% between sometimes and often. So that's the good news, that everyone's, at least most folks are somewhat familiar with the notion of collaborating on an exam, and hopefully that's been a positive experience for you. And if it hasn't, hopefully the next time you collaborate on an exam with your fellow state agencies, you'll be using SES and see how much easier it is. All right, let's keep moving through. I'll go on to the next couple slides here. just to round back to this idea about network supervision, now that we've got the kind of frequency with which you collaborate today in mind, just a couple of benefits on both sides, agencies and companies. When we talk about network supervision, the way I've been thinking about this and the way I think it's been characterized at a couple of our conferences is that this offers an opportunity for state regulators to do two things, and this is a rare chance. Those two things typically don't move together, and that's make regulators more efficient. So by networking together, we are making regulation more efficient and the supervision coverage more efficient across the state system. So that's one, and then that will have an effect of reducing burden for the companies. So very rarely do regulators become more efficient and companies see a regulatory benefit from that. You know, if you think about things that we as regulators do to become more efficient, often we talk about collecting more data, which then leads to an increase in burden on the company side. Well, with SES and moving toward a more networked approach to supervision, I think we're going to be able to do both things. We'll increase our efficiency on the regulator side, and we'll prove to companies, and they will see a decrease in burden as a result of that. So this slide's really just to kind of give you an example of some benefits that we see in SES for agencies and benefits that we see in SES for companies. And if you're not kind of drawing the conclusion now, it's probably a good time for me to mention SES has company users and SES has agency users. So they're both in the system, and that's why we're able to bring benefits not only in the technology platform, but the process to the company side. I mentioned earlier that one of the key benefits of SES, or one of the key changes, I should say, that I think will have long-term positive benefits to state supervision is the development and the promotion of common standards in SES. So the next few slides explain this concept, and we'll jump into the actual system and show you how this will work in real life. But just to set the stage, when I say common standards in SES, what I'm really referring to is a feature in the system called the library. And the SES library is where all of our components, if you will, to exams are managed. Now, you might be asking, what do I mean by components? Components are things like you see on the left: information requests, procedures, references, and then a new concept for many of you, which is areas for review. Areas for review are nothing more than just a topic on the exam or a concept on the exam. An example of an area for review would be compliance with internal routines and controls, or asset quality, or financial condition, or appraisal review. Those are just topics that one might review in the examination. And so, like you see on this slide, there are really two libraries within the SES library. There's a standard library on the left, and then a state-specific library on the right. That's because we know that each of your agencies is somewhat unique. And as much as we try to standardize and harmonize and all work together in a network system, each agency is going to need the freedom and flexibility to operate and ask questions or conduct procedures or include references to their own unique requirements. And we never imagined a system where everybody was marching in perfect lockstep. And that's why we built the state library in tandem with our standard library in SES. And so the state library, as the name may imply, is the space where your agency has full control to create your own information requests and procedures and references. But in doing so, you should reference, and you will in the system, reference the standard library, and where there are good standards in place, maybe don't add your state-specific things. So where there's a good standard information request asking for a balance sheet, maybe don't ask your state-specific one, use our standard. That's kind of the interplay between these two. And the value proposition in this, I think, will become clear as we get into the demo and you see what standards can do and how quickly an exam can be set up, how that familiarity will benefit companies, and I'll give you a little sneak peek on some features that we're bringing into the system in a future release. You may be wondering, who the heck is setting these standards, and who do you guys think you are over there at CSBS that can just put these standards out? Well, we're not. The answer is these standards have been largely in place through different groups of state regulators going back many years. A couple examples are the MMC, the Multi-State Mortgage Committee Exam Request List. The MTRA has a great work program full of procedures that we built into our system, we built into SES. Those are just a couple examples. But the message here really is, wherever there are supervision standards created by a group of regulators, whether it's MTRA, whether it's ARMOR, whether it's NACA, NACARA, CSVS, whomever, we can take those standards and we can put them into the system, and they become usable by all agencies in a very consistent and uniform manner. And I think that helps every agency limit the amount of work they have to do by creating their own, because they're already in our system. You might as well use the standards where they work for you. And it'll benefit, as I've been saying a couple of times now, the companies will start to see familiarity with their exams when they're occurring across different agencies. So those are just a couple of the examples that end up in our standard library. And like I mentioned, you will see standards in action here in this demo. So I'm going to jump into our training environment of SES, because I wanted to show you, one, that this is a living, breathing system, and that we really do have a working system out in production and in the field today. And I think our best way to show that is for me to log into the training environment and show you how a real regulator would go through this process. But I need to set the stage for you, because what I found in these demos is that they can take a lifetime, and we only have a few short minutes on this call today. So what I'm going to demo you today is really the process of the examiner in charge, the EIC, creating their information request list using the standards that are in SES. And so we got an exam that was scheduled. So what I did kind of ahead of time last night preparing for this, I logged in as a regulator and I scheduled an examination. I assigned myself as the EIC, and I created my scope. I said what I was planning on reviewing in this examination. Give me a minute to hop over to our demo environment and sign in as a user from the state of Ohio. So I am now logged in as a user into SES from the state of Ohio. And again, this is our training environment, so none of the information here is confidential. You don't need to worry about seeing anything you shouldn't. Just to give you a quick kind of tutorial of this homepage or this section of the system, what you're seeing here is the homepage of a user at what we're calling the staff director or the staff user role. These are roles in the system that are given a little extra permissions in the system above what a typical examiner would have. It has nothing to do with where this person sits in their agency, so this role can be held by an examiner if it's appropriate. The term staff director just means this person has the authority to schedule exams and direct the activities of a number of staff in their state agency. So you'll see that in the options that they have. They can kick off a new exam here. They can start scheduling exams here. We've got this library, which I've been talking a lot about. That's here. We're not going to jump into that today because I'll show you the results of our hard work in the library in this demo. And then finally manage some complaints. Moving on down a little bit, on the home screen of every user's interface, they will see the tasks that they have here. This user currently has no tasks, but there would be a list of tasks that you would have outstanding for your particular login on your home page. And then just some other miscellaneous functions that this particular user has. In the midsection of the screen, we present information that we think is relevant to that role. And so this being a higher level staff user, staff director role, there's a couple approvals that are pending. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty details on this, but anything that's kind of pending approval at this authority level is presented here. And then in the following section, we give some information about matters that are requiring attention. These are exam issues that were raised in exams that took place in Ohio that resulted in some kind of issue being tracked with the company. In this case, the company is Neo Partners, and there was a matter requiring attention associated to that exam. Don't pay a ton of attention to the details on this because, again, this is our training environment and things are kind of being added and manipulated in this environment as folks come through our training process on this system. So you can see some text here that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. Just ignore that. In the true version or the live version of SES where you're conducting real exams, obviously that wouldn't be the case. So like I mentioned, I set up a couple exams in our system yesterday to give a tutorial of this. So I'm going to jump into the one I had set up. And to refresh your memory, last night what I did in preparation for this is I scheduled an exam of Gateway Financial. You'll see that here. So this is the home screen of the Gateway Financial exam. The exam's starting in July of 2022. So we're a little ways out on this. And then some other details about this exam that I had set up. So a couple things to kind of highlight here are the business activities that I included in this exam. So this was me saying to the system, I'm doing an exam of Gateway Financial. It is a money service business company, and I'm going to review these business activities of that company. So things like bill paying, check cashing, money transmission, transporting currency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You'll see across the top here, we're not going to get into these tabs, but there's some probably pretty obvious functions that you may interact with as you're going through an exam of SES. One is where I can assign participants. I can go into this participants tab and add team members to my exam if I need to. I can build my exam team if I need to. That can also all be set up ahead of time by the person who does the scheduling in your state. So if you're wondering why that's here, it's a place where you can make changes to it if you need to, but also leave it alone if it's been set up ahead of time. For the demo, I want to show you how SES really pulls together an information request very quickly. And the way SES was engineered was to have the examiner first say, what are you reviewing about the company? So you saw on the previous screen, I said, this is a money transmitter company. I'm reviewing these business activities. Well, the next step in the process is to define the scope of a company's exam. And so you'll see last night, I had added a number of scope items to this exam. So I deliberately did this to save us a little time in today's demo, but just to kind of step through what this means is getting back to that area for review concept. I've just simply added these areas for review to my exam. That's what I had done last night. I said I'm going to review advertising and marketing, affiliates and related organizations, and on down the line to compliance and internal routines and controls. The way to think about this is to say, this is my scope, so to speak. And these are the concepts or the areas in this exam that we're going to cover as a team. There are probably 40 different areas for review that you can choose from. And for each, industry type and for each exam scope, this will look a little different. Some agencies have a defined set of areas that they have to look at for a full scope, and that's different from a limited scope. This gives you the flexibility to build this the way you want. If you say, in my state, a limited scope is only 5 things, then you would only pull up 5 things on here. In a full scope exam, I think this is more reflective of a typical full scope exam, so we're going to run with this. So once I've built my scope, I'm going to complete it, and this is where the automation and the connection to standards pulls in. So you can see, right as I'm about to complete the scope, SES is telling me that standard core information requests are going to be added to this exam. And that's what I want. And that's why I think these standards are so important. So we're going to complete the scope. And what SES is now doing in the background is it's reaching into the library and it's saying, for money transmission exams or money service business exams, with these business activities, are there any information requests that go along with those areas for review that Kyle put on his scope? And you can see here are the areas for review that I put. So it's looking for information requests on advertising and marketing. It's looking for affiliates and related organizations. It's looking for the same thing for agent review and authorized delegates. And it's It's hunting through the library to find those items that we've identified as standard and marked core. So you see now there's an information request tab, and we've got a number of information requests pulled onto the screen. So for those who are new and maybe don't have a lot of familiarity with the layout of SES, I got here by clicking this information request tab, and this home screen is where you're brought to and shows you kind of in a roll-up view all the information requests that are now part of your list that you're going to send to the company in advance of this exam. So this is your new request list, and I think this is a good change management moment. Whereas before you probably had a request list with a large piece of paper or a 10-page PDF document listing out the 100 questions you were asking a company in advance of an exam, that's gone away. Those questions are now here in SES, and they've been pulled onto your exam with a few clicks. So I'll give you a minute to kind of look this screen over, and I'll call out a couple things for you just to drive some of these points home. You should be recognizing on the left those areas for review. These are the things that I said are part of my scope. Next up is a column of ready to send. These are all the information requests that got pulled forward in the library. You can see advertising and marketing didn't have any. I didn't get any, there were no standards in the library for advertising and marketing for money transmission or money service businesses. Same with affiliates and related organizations, but there were 11 in agent review and authorized delegates. The next column over indicates which ones of these have been sent to the company. Obviously, none of them have been sent to the company yet because that's our next step. And then the last one is which ones have responses been received from the company. So this is kind of your information request dashboard. And I think this is really cool because, I mean, I remember as an examiner, you would send out the bank, the request list, a couple weeks before the exam started, and then some Friday afternoon you'd have to drive to the bank, load up a bunch of boxes of materials, put in the trunk of your car, and drive back to the office. Those days are gone. At least on the non-bank side, those days are gone, and maybe someday on the bank side, those days will be gone if we can use SES one day in the banking space. But what we've replaced it with is a item-by-item system where the company has the response or has the ability to respond to each item and send it back to you as they're done with it or in bulk. And it's their decision on the company side. So I think maybe to illustrate this, I'll open up a more detailed view of this same request, and you can see each request item. So item number 522 is in the agent review and authorized delegates area, and it's asking for a list of current authorized delegates by volume. And it's giving some more information about what specifically you're asking for. Scrolling on down a little bit. Item number 475 is to provide a list of authorized delegates who had due diligence reviews during the exam period in Excel format. Again, more information, and these questions, if you're in the money transmission or money service business exam space, should look very familiar. If you're from the bank exam space or if you're from the mortgage exam space, all you need to think about here is that where you see a question would be a question off of your typical request list. And so, as you saw on the previous page, these are all sitting in that ready to send status. This means they're queued up and ready to go to the company when I want to send them. And so that's really the next logical step in this process. I would click this send information request option. I need to give them a due date because this system operates on tasks and tasks need to have due dates. And so I'll give them the due date of June 26th, for example. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see I'm about to send 140 request lists off to this company. So this company will get, in a minute, I'll kind of explain what happens on the company side. But essentially, this is me sending this company 140 information requests relevant to this exam. So you validate that the requests and the due dates are all current and accurate. As a regulator, you have the ability to provide some comments here. You can say, contact us with any questions. You upload a document. Maybe your state agency has a nice first day request letter that includes some welcome information or some statutory language from your state agency. You can upload that document here if you so choose. And then you can also choose to be notified as these responses come back from your company. That's just an option you can choose. If you want a notification or an email each time you get a response back, SES will send you an email as the EIC every time a response comes back. If you don't want those emails and you just want to come back every day into SES and check, you can just leave that unchecked and proceed. So I'm going to send these off to the company and just talk through a little bit before we jump back into the slide what that means on the company side. So on the company side now, the individual who leads exams at the company gets an email from SES, and that email says, you now have an exam underway of your company, and there are certain tasks that you need to complete. So then they log into SES, and the first task that they have to do is they have to decide who's going to be in charge at that company about that exam. So then they can log in and decide whether it's going to be, person A or person B. And then whoever's in charge of that exam, whoever takes ownership, so to speak, of that exam in that company, can then build out their internal team of people who begin responding to these information requests. So they can log in and they can start compiling responses, they can start attaching documents. They basically open up each one of these information requests and they read what it's asking for, they respond to it, and then they may include an attachment or a link to a resource or a reference somewhere out on the web, and then send that back to the regulator, and then go on to the next one. And then they repeat that 139 more times, and they've completed your information request. So that's really a tutorial of the creation process. And the key point there was, as we were building this out, we added 140 information requests to our list with just by adding these items to our scope. So when I added management and board, I got 34 information request items tailored specifically to this exam. That you are guaranteed to know that these 34 questions related to management and board apply to money service businesses and the business activities that this company is engaged in that you put as part of your exam scope. If this was a mortgage exam, these numbers would be different because mortgage has different number of management and board questions that they ask. Same thing with Bank Secrecy Act. These 16 questions are specific to money transmitters and they're specific to the business activities that are part of this exam. So that, I guess, going all the way back to our kind of opening slides are really, I think, one of the best examples of common standards being used across state agencies to make creating an information request that's familiar and consistent very easy. Now imagine yourself in the company's shoes. You've just got this exam from Ohio, and it's got 140 items on it, and you're probably thinking, good grief, it's a Tuesday afternoon. I don't have time to sit down and fill these 140 items out right now. And then you start looking at it and you realize that you've seen these items before and they're consistent. And you've used SES before. And you know that the document you supplied to the previous regulator can work for this one. And so you start just walking things over and you've much more quickly and accurately filled out your request and your responses to your state regulator, which should speed up the exam process. Not to mention that you don't have to get in a car and drive across the state or drive across your county and pick it up from a company and review it off-site. All of the transactions now are happening in the system. All the documents sent and received are tracked, logged. Nothing can get lost in the shuffle. And I think that's a major game changer and a significant win for SES. So I'm going to go back to our presentation and get started with the next phase of this, which is a deeper dive on scheduling in the system. So I mentioned that SES presents information about the exams you're scheduling from other regulators' activities. To show that, I would love to do a demo for you today, but it's too detailed to do in the remaining 20 minutes, and I knew we wouldn't be able to do the standards and the scheduling demo. Maybe a future one of these sessions, we can do a deep dive, an even deeper dive into the scheduling features. But for today's call, I've just built a couple slides to explain the concept and the type of decisions that you can make using the SES scheduling features. The goals of SES scheduling, or scheduling exams in SES, is to put information that you did not have before at your fingertips, more accurately on your screen. The concepts in this are very simple. It needed to, as we started gathering requirements from our regulators about this, we heard that first and foremost, it needs to be flexible for my agency. I need to be able to come into this and schedule on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis. Some agencies do it every 6 months, and some agencies even do it once a year. So they said unanimously, we don't all do this the same way, so you have to make this flexible. The other requirement was that everybody agreed that knowing what other agencies were up to would be very helpful information as they were building out their schedules. So they kind of said, look, if you could find a way to present some information about what other agencies are doing with these companies, we would use that information in our own scheduling decisions. So we took that as a requirement. The next was everybody expressed a desire to be more risk focused and to make decisions about scheduling or even scoping the exams once scheduled based on risk. So we're working on that, and we are supplementing it now with some other tools that you may be familiar with, called like the Mortgage Scheduling Assistant. We've got some scheduling assistants or some risk-focused tools that any regulator can use as they're using SES to better draw up their schedule. And then last but not least, that word networked again. This was another goal of scheduling in SES, was to make it feel like you're scheduling with your peers and to make it seem like you're scheduling alongside your fellow regulators and you're not operating in a silo. And then I think we achieved that. Like I said, I'd love to show you this in the system, but it does take a little while. So what I'm going to do is just kind of walk you through the workflow and explain what happens at each step along the way. So when you go to schedule exams in SES, the first step you're going to take on the left is you're going to use some data tools. Maybe these are tools that you have in your state, or maybe these are tools that we are offering to you, like the scheduling assistant I mentioned earlier. And you're going to use those tools to identify a group of companies. You're going to identify, say, let's just say 10 companies that you want to work with today to get on your schedule next month. So you're going to slice and dice the data, and you're going to identify your 10. And you're going to take those 10, and you're going to find them in SES. And we make it easy for you to find them in SES. We allow you to filter and sift through the companies, of the thousands of companies that you examine. We'll allow you to find each of those 10 in SES. So you walk them over, you've got your 10 now in SES. So you take those 10, you put them what I kind of call our basket or a shopping cart. And this is, if this is feeling a lot like shopping online to you, it's because it actually operates very similarly. You go find the 10 companies you want to examine. Maybe that's like the 10 grocery items you want to put in your shopping cart, and you put those 10 companies in your cart, and then you proceed to the next step. The next step being the checklist here. The next step is really where all the magic happens. That's where you'll open each company's tab, or you'll open each company up, and you'll take a look at what's going on with that company in the other agencies and all the other states in the country. And when I say what's going on, I mean, does any state have a scheduled exam of that company? So right away you'll see, oh, my friends up in New Hampshire have an exam scheduled for this company. Maybe I should join that exam. That could be something you consider. The next bit of information is any exams that are in process. So the first one was any scheduled exams or any pending exams. And the next layer of information is any exams that are in process, underway right now. You can see maybe California has an exam of this agency, or excuse me, exam of this company underway right now. That would be useful information to you. Then the next layer of information is any exams that have been recently completed. Maybe there was an exam that wrapped up last week of this company. Well, that's information that might be useful to you. You might want to say, maybe I'll just take a look at that regulator's previous exam and use the results of their exam to inform my exam decisions, whatever the case may be. So you take a look at all that information. In addition to any complaints that might be on the company in the system, in addition to any outstanding supervisory concerns that have been flagged by any other agency in the system, and you start to make decisions at each of these companies. These decisions are how to put them on your schedule. Remember, you've already decided that these companies need to be scheduled for something, and now you're deciding what to do with them. And the choices are schedule your single state exam, which hopefully that's the last resort. Join another exam, which is a good choice, because if there's another exam going on from another agency in about the same time frame that you were going to examine them, why not just join on and have a joint exam? Don't have two single states when one joint exam will do. And the third option is to really just kick that can down the road for a while and maybe take a look at it again in your next scheduling round. That's the shifting the due date. So those are the decisions you'll make about how to handle this company that you've decided to schedule. Then the next step is to confirm those decisions, and then actually that puts them on the schedule for your state. And if you had chosen to join another state's exam, maybe 5 of those companies, you saw other state agencies had exams in the works or planned, and you decided you were just going to jump onto those exams with those states, you actually submit that request through the system. And you say, through the system, I'm from the state of Ohio. I'm interested in joining your exam, New Hampshire. Here are the people I want to participate. Will you accept? And if they accept your request, then that becomes a joint exam in the system. And we've just eliminated a single state exam by the state of Ohio. And now we've got a joint exam by Ohio and New Hampshire. Boom, efficiency. We're moving forward in a networked manner. And I think that's a good use case to highlight and how scheduling really brings that forward. Then the last step is just assigning the EIC and assembling the exam team in your state. If you're moving forward in a single state, that's obviously very easy. If you're moving forward in a joint exam, you've already really done that because you've told that other agency who's coming on and what they're going to be working on or what skill sets those examiners bring to the table. So that's scheduling in SES. And like I mentioned, each agency can do this as frequently or infrequently as they need to. If you have a relatively small portfolio of maybe consumer finance lenders or auto lenders, maybe you only schedule those exams out once a year. That would be very easy to do. On the other hand, if you have thousands of mortgage companies and you've got to do thousands of exams a year, then you may need to schedule, or you probably already are scheduling more frequently in your process, and you can do that in SES just as you do today. So that brings us to our final deep dive, and I want to turn it over to my colleague Lindsay Schmidt, who's been really the brains behind the creation of the complaints functionality in SES, to give you a little preview of some new functionality that's coming in SES. And it all revolves around, as you're guessing here, consumer complaints and the agencies and companies handling and processing and working through consumer complaints. We decided at the last minute to include this today because we really want to get the word out that SES is more than just an exam system. It's an exam system that supports exams, investigations, complaints, and in the future, who knows what. So with that, let me turn it over to Lindsay. And Lindsay, just let me know when you want me to advance to the next slide.
Okay, sounds good. I know we want to leave about 15 minutes for questions or so I will try to go as quickly as possible. But as Kyle mentioned, wanted to talk to you all a little bit about our complaint system. The complaint system is built and accessed in SES, but it can really stand alone as its own system. A little bit later, there's a slide that will talk about the scope of the functionality, and we've already built quite a lot. We could easily spend a whole hour, maybe even more, just talking about complaints. But for this slide specifically, I wanted to talk to you all about some of the key features and some of the key concepts that we have in the complaint system. So to start, some points about the collaborative aspect of the system. There's an area of the complaint system that you can go to see and click into complaints across all agencies using the complaint system. So this information is right at your fingertips. You'll be able to view basic information about all of these complaints, and then you'll have the ability to filter that list, slice and dice it the way that you want to. You have the ability to request to view additional information about other agencies' complaints if you have a need to do that. So it's a really powerful area of the system that we're really excited about, and we think that it's going to get a lot of use and activity once we launch the complaint system. Another sense of collaboration is the exchange of information between you and the company. So Kyle talked about this a little bit on the exam side. Just like the company has the ability to respond to a request for information about an exam, they have that same functionality to respond to a complaint. So that same ability to request something from the company logs in, they see the details of the complaint, they can go in and provide a response and upload documentation. which you can then react to and then move on your way as far as processing the complaint. The other real benefit of the system is that you can connect complaints to what we call other supervisory activities. And so when we say supervisory activities, we mean exams, investigations, and eventually enforcements once we build enforcements into the system. So as you're probably starting to gather, as you're hearing me talk, as you're hearing Kyle talk, the goal is to have SES be your one-stop shop for all of your supervision needs. So with all of these activities in the system, you have a real opportunity to tell a story about a company's supervision history. So for example, company A had a complaint that snowballed into an investigation. So those connections can really be made and tell a story about a particular company in the system. Another real benefit of the system is you'll be able to it'll be able to readily provide data needed for reporting purposes. So understanding there's a lot of reporting needs around complaints, the system is going to allow complaint users to easily track the number of complaints processed. There's a referral process in the system, so you'll be able to tell how many complaints were referred to certain agencies, how many complaints were referred to federal agencies, how many days a complaint is open. So all of those metrics are able to be easily accessed in the system and is really important to all complaints users. Kyle, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide. Thank you. So as you can see here, we have two different phases going on with complaints. As I've mentioned, we've already built quite a lot in our first phase. So the agency can enter a complaint, they can share complaint information. As I mentioned already, there's a referral process that we've built in, and then they're able to collaborate with other agencies on entity information as well. So there's a lot there. I'll let you read what's there for phase one. Looking over to the phase two area, our next phase of development, we're going to add the ability for an agency to enter and process a complaint for depository companies or institutions. So we recognize that a lot of your existing systems handle complaints across all depositories and non-depositories. So we are working to enhance the system to support all of your complaints needs and not just for depositories. We're also working to fold in consumer-facing functionality. So as a part of this, the phase that's currently built in the system, there is not any consumer-facing functionality. So that will be something that we'll tackle as a part of our future development efforts. Lastly, we recognize that there will always be a need to improve upon what we've already built in the system as a part of phase one. And so we will always have development hours set aside for improvements to existing functionality. And then just to wrap it up, Kyle, if you don't mind going to the next slide. We just want to brief you all and just get you up to speed on where we're at with the system and answer the question is anyone using the complaint system? So no agencies are using the complaint system as of yet, even though we have everything built and ready to go. We're in the process of putting together a 6-week pilot with 8 to 10 agencies, many who have been participating in our agency consumer complaint working group. That pilot is scheduled to start in the beginning of next month, so starting in July. And then once the pilot concludes, we'll evaluate the feedback that comes back, all the feedback coming in from all of the pilot participants, and then we'll start to make plans for a nationwide rollout and see what other agencies may be interested in joining to start using complaints. So I think, Kyle, that's all I wanted to go through. I think we have enough time to open it up for questions if there are any. I did see some in the chat, Kyle. I don't know if you saw those as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And thanks for giving us the overview of complaints. We're very excited to bring that functionality online soon and really hope that is the next step in SES becoming, like Lindsay said, that one-stop shop for all your supervision needs. Feel free to unmute your lines and ask any questions. And we do have a couple questions in the chat function that I can read off here to get us started. One question came in about, will we be downloading exam reports completed before SES became available? There's no walkover of any exam reports from your old system into the new system. So there will be that kind of, if I'm understanding the question correctly, exams that happen before SES will stay wherever they are, and exams that happen after SES will stay in SES, or if you need to download them out of SES, you can do that out of SES. Other questions?
So it looks like we have one in the chat. The question is, will the complaint system apply to complaints on individuals or just the entities?
Good question. You do have the ability to create a complaint on an individual, and then as a part of going through that process, you identify what company the individual works for, if they work for a company, and then the information request process gets exchanged between the company. But you do have the ability to identify a complaint on, let's say, an MLO, and then you're communicating back and forth with the company regarding that complaint. There's also the ability to create a complaint on a branch location as well, but once again, you'll be communicating with the company who'll be responding about that complaint on behalf of the branch.
Right, so the next question is, will you also be able to maintain the complaint as confidential to your own agency? Do you choose what is shared with others?
There's a basic level of complaint information that our agency complaint working group decided was appropriate across all agencies. So it's what we call summary level information about each complaint. And then there is a process to request additional details about that complaint, which then the agency that owns that complaint and created that complaint have the ability to decide whether or not they want to grant that extra access to that agency. So there is a decision point. The agency is the gatekeeper as far as that additional access to that complaint.
And just to tie on to that, the same paradigm exists on the exam side. So all regulators can see some very limited information about all the other exams in the system. Basically, who the company is, what agency is examining it, and a few details about the scope. That's to benefit your scheduling process, as we mentioned. We're calling that, just like Lindsay is calling on the complaint side, we're calling that the summary level information, and that's across all regulators. If you want more details about anything, you've got to ask the agency who owns that record. So nothing is granted automatically beyond that first level, summary level information. I think we had another question about the notification process to companies about an exam. And this was a great question, and I probably should have stressed this as I was going through the information request piece. The first notification a company gets, there's really kind of two ways to answer this question. The first is if a company is totally new to SES, has never had any relationship or connection to SES. For those companies, the company is in SES because we're bringing the data over from NMLS every night, and the company information is in SES. But there are no users for that company in SES because we aren't bringing NMLS users over. There's many good reasons for that, and I won't get into those here, but there's some technical decision-making and business decision-making that went around that, and we ended up at a point where in order to get users associated to a company in SES, the exam contact individual at that company must be invited by a regulator. And we call this company onboarding. And so for totally new companies new to SES, there's a one-time step that the first regulator who examines that company will onboard, if you will, that company user into the system with that company. So if your exam contact at a particular company is Mr. Herndon, then you will onboard Mr. Herndon to that company, and then from that point forward, that individual, Mr. Herndon, has the ability to manage the affairs of that company in SES. So that's the way for totally new companies, they're notified about an upcoming exam. Once they're in, then the notification goes with the information request list. So any subsequent exams after that, the first notification, the first kind of ping or email that they'll get about an upcoming exam is through and when the regulator or the EIC sends that information request list in the system.
So it looks like we have another question on complaints. So would you be able to create on and process complaints about unlicensed companies and individuals?
Yes. So that's a long-winded answer, really. There is a process. There's a whole feature built in the system to allow you to create complaints on what we're calling non-NMLS entities. So if you have a consumer complaint and you are you have maybe little information or you're not quite sure who the entity is, there's an area of the complaint system where you can go in and create that entity and then tag other agencies and maybe even other agency users, other complaint users, to kind of crowdsource and get information about that entity. And you have the ability to create a complaint on that entity as well. So we're calling them non-NMLS entities because they don't exist in the NMLS database. All of the companies that do exist in NMLS are available in SES for you to create exams on, create investigations on, and create complaints on. But there is an entirely different workflow to create a complaint against a company that does not exist in NMLS. And I think that's the most common reason why someone would be unlicensed. They're not on NMLS. You have the ability to go through and do that using that functionality.
And one other little fact about that answer is it's not just if they're not licensed by your agency. It's if they're licensed by any agency through NMLS, then they're available to your agency in SES. So I'll say that again because it can be a little confusing. If any state licenses that company through NMLS, then they are in SES for all states.
Okay, thank you guys. Are there any other questions before we wrap up? I am going to launch a quick poll, just get everybody's ideas on if they would like to have additional virtual discussions on SES. And if you do put yes, if you can put in the chat what you would like it to focus on, that way we can start gearing up to do more.
Thanks, Katie. And while folks are filling out the poll, you'll also see on your screen just where to go for more information. We've got a great website, www.csbs.org, which you all know, but there's a About SES section. The link is there. That's got some videos on it. It's got some additional resources and a map tracking which agencies are using it. So check that out. The call center, the NMLS call center, is supporting the system. And last but not least, at the bottom, you'll see Lindsay, my, and Alejandra's contact information. If you got some detailed questions or if you're going through the process of getting involved in SES now, like I said, you're working through the onboarding and the training, feel free to reach out to one of us if you have any questions. We are here to help.
Great. I just want to give a huge thank you to Kyle, Lindsay, and the whole SES team for joining us today. And then continue to keep putting in the chat on what you want us to focus on for our next SES virtual discussion. And I will end it at that. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Katie. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.